The Detroit Lions are the best team in the NFC. That and more on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome into the new Locked On NFL, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today by Locked On NFL expert Lauren Cox. On today's episode, we're going to talk about who gets fired first, Doug Pederson or Nick Sirianni. Also, the Miami Dolphins are absolutely cooked, and the Detroit Lions have proved once again that they are the class of the NFC. Before we get into it, I do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first to listen each and every day, and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Make sure that you pop in later for the afternoon edition of Locked On NFL and step into the barbershop with Tony Wiggins right here on Locked On NFL. Today's edition of Locked On NFL is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Lauren, the Detroit Lions come out 42-29, put it on the undefeated Seattle Seahawks. Jared Goff looks absolutely phenomenal. 18 for 18, 292, 2 touchdowns, caught a touchdown pass as well. You were telling me right before we came on, it's the most attempts ever without an incompletion in an NFL game. My big takeaway here, Lauren, is I know the Packers have looked good with losing to Minnesota. I know Minnesota has looked good. I know that San Francisco is still out there as a great team, but I think the Detroit Lions are the best team in the NFC, and I trust them the most going through the rest of the season to get to the Super Bowl.
I certainly don't want to take anything away from what Detroit's been able to do. They certainly had one of the most impressive quarterback performances we've seen, and they've scored points well this season, but I'm not quite ready to crown them there just yet. They took the Los Angeles Rams, took them to overtime in week 1. They lost to the Buccaneers in week 2, and even the Cardinals gave them some trouble in week 3, and the Seahawks defense wasn't that great in this game, and they still were close enough throughout the majority of that contest to be breathing right down their neck. Like, it didn't feel to me like the Rams had this like separate themselves from the pack type of performance, but not to say that they're not a very good team and a surely a Super Bowl contender in the NFC. But I look at the Vikings having beaten the 49ers, beaten the Texans, beaten the Green Bay Packers, and feel like that's the team to beat in the NFC. And those two will go head to head in just a couple weeks.
Yeah, we're going to see that game. But what we're also going to see is what Matt Derry from Locked On Lions had to say after this win.
The Detroit Lions are 3-1. They get the job done tonight on Monday Night Football, knocking off the Seahawks 42-29. Matt Derry with you from Locked On Lions. The story tonight, Jared Goff, 18 out of 18 passing. Did not have an incompletion all night. 292 yards passing, 2 touchdowns. Caught a touchdown pass from Amon-Ra St. Brown. Really, the Lions showed better rhythm tonight offensively against a banged-up Seattle defense, missing 4 starters. They mixed the run game in with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs as well. Got the victory at home to get to 3-1 as they head into a bye. Locked On Lions full show coming up momentarily right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe and like us and follow us on YouTube.
Lauren, let me ask you this question, because this is what it comes down to me. Out of all these quarterbacks, who do you trust the most? Jared Goff, Sam Darnold, Brock Purdy, Jordan Love. Look, we could talk about the Commanders playing pretty well. We could talk Baker Mayfield or Kirk Cousins in the AFC South. But to me, those are the top 4 teams in the NFC. Which quarterback do you trust the most out of that 4?
Individually, I feel like it's a combination of quarterback and play caller, right? And even then you throw in Ben Johnson in the mix, and that still is a strong case for the Detroit Lions. I don't know. I just feel like we've seen Goff go. I feel like we got close to Goff's ceiling last season, right? Where it's like, okay, that can get you to the NFC Championship game, but like when you really needed something to put you over the top, he couldn't do it. I mean, can Darnold? I don't know, but Jordan Love seems to be on the cusp of being able to do that. Baker Mayfield has made big plays like that. Like we've seen Goff the most in the playoffs. So I agree. Like he's the
Mhm,
quarterback I trust the most right now. But by week
mhm.
18, maybe that'll change. Maybe those other guys can step up into that spot.
Yeah, that's fair. I also think the emergence of Jameson Williams has really made a big difference. And I know that he didn't have, some phenomenal game. He had 2 catches, one of them for 10 yards, one of them for 70, and the touchdown on only 2 targets. But that big play addition, like the difference between good Jameson Williams and Josh Reynolds is just a huge difference maker there, too. So want to give him his credit. On the Seattle side of things, I called the Seahawks a pretender last week when I spoke with Michelle Majuk on Locked On NFL on Thursday. And one of the big reasons is the turnovers. I know that Geno Smith's interception came late in the game when he was just trying to get him back into it. I understand that fully. But you have the DK Metcalf fumble early in the game that gives the Lions the 14-0 lead that sets them up. And, that lead, they end up winning by 13. So you really hurt the team there. And the 2 weeks before that, Seattle had easy victories, but they had 2 turnovers in both those games. So we've seen 6 turnovers total in 3 weeks for Seattle. You add that to Mike McDonald was supposed to be, a defensive guru. And look, he's still going to run a good defense in Seattle. But when they come up against real teams with real talent, I don't think that this Seahawks team is quite as good of a team as the 3-0 record led people to believe.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I just feel like they haven't been able to operate like exactly what you want from them. Like even in this game, right? Like I don't want Geno Smith to be throwing 56 times, especially when you're running the ball for 7 yards a clip. And Kenneth Walker gets 3
Right.
touchdowns, putting like a 28-yard breakaway. I get that they got down early. It was like 14-0, and you want to try and throw to get back in. But when the running game's working, like don't put so much on Geno Smith's shoulders. He doesn't have to be that guy to keep you in games like this.
Yeah, I don't think that's what they want to be. Now they're down. I get it. They're trying to come back, but like you said, you're running 7 yards a pop. Like you can have a little bit more balance than that. But at the end of the day, for me, Seattle, like I said, pretender. I think they're a good team. I had them as a playoff team, but I'm not trusting Seattle. I'm not putting Seattle in that class of teams that I would take the Buccaneers over the Seahawks if I, gun to my head, had to pick a team. I guess I'll ask you, since we talked about it with Michelle, you're not trusting Seattle in the playoffs, correct?
No, they still have a lot to prove to me. I mean, you look at who they've played so far. They've squeaked one out against the Broncos, went into overtime against the Patriots, and then, an injured bad Dolphins team that we'll talk about here in a little bit. Still terrible. Like the Lions game was their opportunity to say, hey, no, we're legit. We're real. We can beat a team that was in the NFC Championship game that, like, as you were saying, like is one of the top contenders here. And the fact that they went blow for blow, like shows you like, yes, the Seahawks are not a bad team. They're still like a playoff caliber team, but I think especially we'll see how that division shakes out with them and the 49ers when they play their 2 matchups. Like that'll give us a better sense of like, can either of those teams sort of put some of their mistakes aside and settle in a little bit more and be the contenders that we thought they could be.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, though, it is a double-digit loss for the Seattle Seahawks and somewhat of a prove that your schedule wasn't just super weak in the first 3 weeks, and they didn't pass the test. Now, speaking of not passing the test, you mentioned the Miami Dolphins, and whoo, boy, the Dolphins are cooked. We're going to talk about that. Make sure that you check out Locked On NFL afternoon version with Tony Wiggins in the barbershop. It's Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Hey, NFL fans, yep, I am talking to you. You can start this season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game and you want to check out the latest stats, but also if you play-by-play and so much more, you can do it all on FanDuel on the same exact page where you place your bets. It's an all-encompassing hub for football information. And right now, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Make sure that you check out America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel. Head to FanDuel.com. All right, Lauren, let's continue today's edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. We talked about our first Monday Night Football matchup where Jared Goff was sensational as the Lions beat the Seattle Seahawks. But there was another Monday Night Football game out there, whether folks saw it or not. It was the Miami Dolphins and the Tennessee Titans. And the Tennessee Titans win that one 31-12. The Miami Dolphins just looked absolutely lifeless in this game. And I got to tell you, my guy Kyle Krabs from Locked On Dolphins, we're going to hear from him in a moment, but his show coming out of this loss for the Dolphins was asking, who's going to take accountability for this loss and for the way that the Dolphins have played the last 2 weeks. And I got to tell you, Lauren, the Dolphins are absolutely cooked this year. Their season is pretty close to over. They're on life support. We don't know what's going on with Tua, but look at some of the other injuries. Teron Armstead, their left tackle, out of the game. Raheem Mostert, not in the game. Jalen Phillips, their good edge rusher, gets hurt in the middle of the game and has to leave the game with a knee injury after having an Achilles last year, dealing with injuries coming into his NFL career. Bradley Chubb still not back. Like, the Dolphins are David Long in this game, banged up. Their linebacker, like, there are so many pieces missing on offense. Their backup quarterback is hurt, and they have to go with Tyler Huntley, who has literally been there for 2 weeks, and his bus pass is still in his pocket. Like, I just don't know that I'm willing to go to a place with this Dolphins team where I want accountability or Mike McDaniel to be, in trouble here. They're just completely depleted.
I'm with you part of the way there, and yet I also feel like, man, when you've got Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill and, Jonnu Smith and like Achan's not a bad running back. Like, not that the Dolphins should be winning football games and scoring 40 points a game, but like, you should be able to score more than 12 and score more than 3. Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like a lot of teams are dealing with injuries at a lot of spots, and maybe not all in as critical spots as the Dolphins are. But I think about, the Rams are still scoring points. Okay, but their quarterback's not hurt. But you've got the Packers finding ways to score with an injured quarterback. The Colts with Joe Flacco come in, and like, these teams have had a lot of injuries also, and they're not really getting that as an excuse. They're finding a way to, if not win games, at least score more than the Dolphins, who have one of these, genius offensive coaches. Like, where's there? I understand the need for accountability there.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. Let's hear from Kyle Krabs from Locked On Dolphins, because clearly he thinks there needs to be some accountability, and it really sounds like he's talking about Mike McDaniel.
This team is playing like one of, if not the worst team in football right now. And some of this is indeed an issue of your starting quarterback being out. Your starting quarterback's not going to fix all this. And I think, if anything, the absence of the starting quarterback is pulling and bringing to light and amplifying some of the fundamental issues that exist with this football team. And it goes to as basic as calling plays and designing a plan to play offensive football based on the talent that you have. And the affirmation came from Dan Orlovsky and Louis Riddick, who called the game and were on the broadcast. And they're sitting here asking for the same stuff that Dolphins fans have been asking for since Tua was out.
Look, I'll say one thing, and that's the Miami Dolphins run maybe the most unique offensive scheme in the NFL. It's been well documented. So maybe that you can blame Mike McDaniel, like, hey, you have created a system that cannot withstand injury if you don't have specific players. But at the end of the day, like, you're not winning the Super Bowl if you don't have your starting quarterback, unless you're the Eagles, which that Eagles team led by Doug Pederson and Nick Foles may be the biggest outlier in NFL history based on what we see now. We'll talk about Doug Pederson here in just a second. But if somebody needs to take accountability, to me, it's Chris Grier, the general manager of the Miami Dolphins. You let Christian Wilkins go. You sign Aaron Brewer at center, who is the smallest starting offensive lineman in the NFL. He's a guy who I covered in Tennessee, who I know well. You don't bring in a better backup quarterback than a guy like Skylar Thompson, or having Tim Boyle on your practice squad or as a third quarterback. Like, to me, if accountability needs to happen in Miami, it's on the front office side, where I think that they lost a lot of talent. They lose Robert Hunt at guard. He goes to Carolina, and it looks pretty good in front of Andy Dalton right now. Like, the Dolphins lost a ton of talent on their roster, and everyone's blaming the injuries or looking at Mike McDaniel and how he's scheming up the offense. But to me, it's a roster talent issue, and the injuries only highlight that even more. So if there needs to be accountability in Miami, for me, it's Chris Grier at general manager, not Mike McDaniel, who has proven, in my opinion, to be a very good coach.
Yeah, I'm with you there that I think McDaniel needs a lot of patience still, and I think it'd be way too hasty to try and make a change quickly. The quarterback spot is definitely the one that stands out here. Like, I feel like we certainly know what Tim Boyle is at this stage of his NFL career. Everyone knows he's not a good quarterback, and like, I don't know if Skylar Thompson was gonna surprise you as a guy who was gonna turn out to be better than we thought at this point. Like, at least Tyler Huntley is somebody who we've seen play really well in Baltimore, and it makes it more disappointing when he struggles in this one. But as you said, like, he just got here and is still trying to learn that stuff. So I can feel the disappointment there and feel like, yeah, like if you're gonna go all in on Tua, you also have to be all in on, hey, he might get hurt sometimes, and you need to have a better option than that. And there were plenty of quality backup quarterbacks available throughout the process. I mean, Ryan Tannehill is still sitting out there right now. Maybe hard feelings there with the Dolphins, but like, as an example, that there is talent out there that's better than Tim Boyle.
Yeah, 100%. And if you have a guy like Tua as your starting quarterback who has had these medical issues in the past, that only highlights the need for – they could have went out and got Joe Flacco. They could have went out and got a Gardner Minshew. They could have done more to bolster this backup quarterback spot. Now, is that Mike McDaniel saying, hey, I don't need it? Hey, I like the guys we have, to the GM, so the GM doesn't do anything? That we don't know. You know what I mean? That is a good question to have, but at the end of the day, I guess I just think the Dolphins' issues are bigger than quarterback. And let me just say this. Taking a page out of Doug Pederson's book, he can't go out there and make the plays too, right? That's what Pederson said. Tyler Huntley threw a pass behind Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill could have caught it, but it was a backward pass that led to a fumble. And Tyreek Hill was wide open, beat L'Jarius Sneed down the sideline twice in this game, and Huntley missed him. And those three plays right there, those are just on Tyler Huntley. Like, he just executed poorly. That's not the coach's fault. Now, on the other side of this, I don't want to spend too much time here on the Titans. Obviously, it's a team that we covered. Nobody came to hear me talk Titans. If you did, check out Locked On Titans. That's where I really get into it. But there are going to be a lot of people around the NFL, Lauren, asking whether Mason Rudolph should take over for Will Levis. Will Levis only throws the ball 4 times, has another mind-numbing mistake and gives the ball away, leads the NFL in turnovers now at this stage, has a physically reckless play that leads to him getting hurt. It might be, a shoulder injury. Who knows how long he's going to be out. Here's my take, and you could tell me from an outside perspective if you think I'm crazy, but I said this about Bryce Young on this podcast. I'll say it about Will Levis as well. The Titans need to keep going to Will Levis if he's healthy. You're not doing anything with Mason Rudolph, even though he's a good backup quarterback. He's not going to change the ceiling of the team or make the Titans a playoff team or anything like that. And Will Levis, for better or for worse, he's either going to figure it out and then you have your answer at quarterback, or he's not, and you're going to get a really high pick in the next draft to look at some of these quarterbacks that are coming in. So I think the Titans, and Brian Callahan, the head coach of the Titans, seems to be saying the same, but I think the Titans need to stick with Will Levis if he's healthy, no matter what. Do you disagree?
It feels to me like if you bench a healthy Will Levis, if he's healthy enough to play, and you go to Mason Rudolph, like, then you're waving the white flag on the Will Levis era. You're saying, all right, we are for sure done in our evaluation of him. We know he's not the guy. Let's just ride it out with Rudolph, and he'll take care of the football and game manage us to 6 wins or whatever. And that's fine, I guess. But like, it all kind of depends on how done they want to be with Will Levis. Because I do think we know what Mason Rudolph is and isn't at this point of his career. He's not going to surprise you and become some quarterback that's going to lead you to victories. He's going to take care of the ball and manage you. But like, maybe there's still something in Will Levis. It's only been 12 games, not even a full season's worth of games just yet.
Right.
I don't know that he's going to uncover something great, but like, I don't think the jury is 100% sold on him, but he's the volatile option. It's the highs and the lows could still be there, whereas Rudolph is going to be kind of right in the middle there with not much of a ceiling. So it kind of depends on where the Titans feel like they are this season, if they'd rather just kind of like punt on it a little bit with Mason Rudolph or go crazy and let it fly with Will Levis.
Well, I don't think that the rest of the team is good enough to, just midline with Mason Rudolph. Like, you only do that if you have a really good roster and the quarterback is just absolutely sinking you. And I think the Titans have some good spots, but they aren't that good. You know what I mean? Like, to be acting like that. And at the end of the day, like you said, Mason Rudolph, we know who he is. He's not having a Tannehill, a Geno Smith, a Sam Darnold, a Baker Mayfield resurgence. He was never that level of player. Those guys are all former first-round picks. It's just not going to be like that for Mason Rudolph. But speaking of being done and waving the white flag, who gets fired first? Doug Pederson or Nick Sirianni? We're going to talk about that right now. It's Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is the best place to buy tickets, period. Why? They have the best features in the ticket buying marketplace. And they just got an even better feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And they still have a view from your seat. You can literally see a panoramic view of what your seat is going to look like. Not only that, but if you toggle on the feature, you can get all-in pricing for your ticket so you know what you're going to pay for your ticket when you go to see it. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Terms apply. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. All right, Lauren, let's cap off today's edition of Locked On NFL. We talked about the 2 Monday Night Football matchups. Now let's get into one of the big storylines going into next week and coming out of week 4 in the NFL, and that is the status of a couple of different coaches. So the Jacksonville Jaguars have dropped to 0-4. They look like they had the game in hand against the Texans, and then C.J. Stroud comes back and rips their hearts out. Doug Pederson is on the hot seat. No way around it. He's got to be feeling the heat, but he is not the only coach. Philadelphia, the Eagles may be 2-2 in this first month of the season, but there are people calling for Nick Sirianni's head right now because the Eagles are certainly disappointing, and they just lost 33-16 to Tampa Bay after Tampa Bay got shellacked by the Denver Broncos the week before. I know it may seem simple, but who do you think gets fired first here? Doug Pederson with a more patient Jaguars organization or Nick Sirianni with a hell on wheels Philadelphia Eagles organization?
Well, that's the thing is, like, right now, the Jaguars are in a patient spot and the Eagles are in the eager spot. But historically, the Jaguars are the franchise that fires coaches mid-season. They've done it 3 times in the last 15 years.
True.
And their general manager is Trent Baalke, who did it like 3 different times in San Francisco. I mean, he fired, I guess not mid-season, but fired Mike Nolan, fired Mike Singletary, Jim Tomsula, Jim Harbaugh. Like, they are the firing team, whereas the Eagles, they fired Chip Kelly mid-season in 2015, and that's been the last time since 1985. Like, I think Howie Roseman doesn't want to be that franchise that has a short leash with a coach and says, oh, the moment things start going wrong, we fire you, and maybe coaches start to feel like, oh, is that an organization that's going to have enough faith and trust in me to do my job? But they already fired Sirianni's coordinators last offseason, so there's already the pressure on him. I do think if there was a betting line at FanDuel Sportsbook, I would bet on Doug Pederson to be more likely to be fired, but I can feel the pressure on Sirianni. It's just a different kind of a heat there.
I definitely do agree. And look, I know that Doug Pederson won a Super Bowl in Philadelphia, but he didn't win it in Jacksonville, and they don't have the same love for you there. And Nick Sirianni did just 2 years ago take the Eagles to a Super Bowl. So I think, that combined with they have more wins, that should give Sirianni a little bit more room. But I'll tell you, my guy Louie from Locked On Eagles, I don't know if he agrees, Lauren. Let's hear from him.
I can't even wait till halftime. Like, Nick Sirianni's got to go. I'm sorry. Yeah, you can say the players aren't executing, but if it was like 1 or 2 areas they were struggling, sure, you could blame it on the players. But when they're failing to execute with forced missed tackles, double-digit missed tackles in the first half, there's been at least, 7 penalties on the Eagles so far? You look at the turnovers, another turnover already in the first half. Bad drops. You look at soft coverage, no dialed up pressure whatsoever. That's all coaching. Like, when everything is going wrong, that is coaching. Nick Sirianni and this team has not scored a single point in the first quarter this year. They're never playing with a lead. It's 2023 all over again. You can't sustain success when you have to pull yourself out of these holes that you put yourselves in every single game. You need a new head coach. This is coaching. It's on Sirianni, Fangio. Kellen Moore's not creative at all today.
Listen, I get Louis' frustration. You see your team go to the Super Bowl, and then they collapse the way they collapsed last year. They come out the way that they played this year in certain matchups, but no A.J. Brown, no Devontae Smith, no Lane Johnson. Like, I don't want to make injury excuses again like I did for the Dolphins, you know what I mean? But at the same time, those aren't just like your normal players. Those are your absolute studs that make your team special. So I think the win that they got in New Orleans, getting Saquon Barkley in there, you just got to have a little bit more patience with Nick Sirianni and see what the team looks like when you have your players.
I love Louis, but I had to laugh when he said this is 2023 all over again. Yeah, when you started 10-1, can you imagine? Yeah. They finished 11-6.
Philly, man, it's different in Philly, man.
They lost a bunch of their games, but like, man, I would have loved to go 11-6 last season. Your team would have loved to go 11-6 last season. Like,
yes.
I totally understand the frustration, but it's all frustration based on how high the expectations are. And I don't know that like firing Nick Sirianni is going to make everything better. Like, I get wanting accountability for when there's been mistakes, but like, okay, you make Kellen Moore or Vic Fangio the head coach instead, and is that going to make them commit fewer penalties? Is a different voice there for the rest of this season? Like, I get that, you know, maybe in the offseason you want to make a change if they have another disappointing year and they win 9 or 10 games or whatever it is and a wild card loss or whatever, you say, okay, that's not good enough. But like mid-season, I give him some time, I guess, to try and turn things around, because he has been successful even in 2013 or 2016 or 2023 all over again, 11-6. Like, all right, I don't have a lot of sympathy for your 11-6 season.
Right. That's a great point there too. And you know, I go back to Jacksonville. To me, there is a fundamental problem in the culture in Jacksonville, and that's something that my guy Tony Wiggins from Locked On NFL in the afternoons, he's talked about that a ton. Like, they don't want to play for Doug Pederson. The message is not resonating anymore. And when Doug Pederson comes out and says, like, you know, I can't go out there and execute for the players, it's a two-way street. I said this online when Tony pointed it out. Once the coach starts to publicly defend himself and blame his players, that's when it's over. Like that, the players hear that stuff. They are not going to like that. And it's one of those things where he may be right, but you don't say that. You just don't. You take the blame and say, I need to be better. You know, I had all my old football coaches used to say, don't be a finger pointer, be a thumb pointer. And Doug Pederson sounds like a coach that knows he's about to get fired, and he wants everybody to know it's his players' fault, not his fault. And that's why, you know, overall, Nick Sirianni has heat, but I think we both agree Doug Pederson is going to be the first guy fired out of those two as things look right now.
Yeah, or it's just kind of an organizational thing from top to bottom there. Like, it reminds me real quick, like Jay Glazer from Fox Sports, I heard him on an interview say recently, like when he goes to training camps, right? Some teams at training camp practice, like they just hit harder and they have just a higher level of intensity where they're really like, you just feel it dialed up. And like he said, the Eagles are one of those teams, like consistently every season, they just do things at a little bit more of an intense level that you can tell they're just run well and they take this stuff seriously. And I don't think Jacksonville has quite fallen in the same category, maybe ever.
Right. 100%. I mean, again, it just leaves me with this. How in the world did Doug Pederson and Nick Foles win a Super Bowl? Just unreal. One of life's great mysteries. I mean, aliens, the pyramids, the Bermuda Triangle, the Malaysia flight, and the 2018 Philadelphia Eagles. Like, we will just never, ever know. But with that being said, that is going to do it for today's edition of Locked On NFL. Make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. Again, make sure that you check out Locked On NFL in the afternoons with Tony Wiggins in the barbershop. That's going to do it for me, your host, the Madman Tyler Rowland, with Lauren Cox, as I am every single Tuesday. As I tell you guys every day as well, stay safe out there.